The slam of the front door echoed like a gunshot through the quiet Ohio night as my father's voice boomed. "Get out and never come back. You're no son of mine." I stood on the porch with nothing but a backpack and the crushing weight of my truth finally spoken, realizing in that moment that being gay had just cost me everything I had ever known. The cold March wind whipped across the gravel driveway, carrying the faint scent of my mother's apple pie that still lingered from dinner. I could see her silhouette in the kitchen window, hands pressed to her mouth, but she didn't move. My younger brother Tommy peeked from behind the curtains upstairs. His eyes wide with confusion he was too young to process. At 18, I was suddenly adrift in a world that had felt safe only hours earlier. The argument had started innocently enough. Dad asked why I never brought girls home, and the words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Because I'm gay, Dad. I've known for years." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Then came the rage. Plates crashed, accusations flew about sin and shame, and my mother's quiet sobs only made it worse. Now here I was, walking away from the only life I had ever known, the farmhouse lights fading behind me like a dying star. I hitchhiked the first ride to the bus station in town, my hands shaking as I counted the $23 in my wallet. The Greyhound to Chicago left at dawn. I spent the night on a hard bench, replaying every family dinner, every church sermon where the pastor had warned about people like me. Was I really broken? The bus ride was a blur of flat Midwest fields and my own racing thoughts. By the time we pulled into Chicago's terminal, exhaustion and fear had settled deep in my bones. I had no plan, no contacts except one name I had kept secret for months. Alexander. We had met at a summer camp the year before, two boys who recognized something in each other's eyes without ever saying it aloud. He was 19 now, studying business at a community college, and he had given me his number on a torn piece of notebook paper the last day of camp. I found a payphone and dialed with trembling fingers. "Alexander? It's Jude." They kicked me out. "I'm in Chicago." His voice, steady and warm even through the static, cut through my panic. "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." That call became my lifeline. He arrived in an old blue sedan, his light brown hair messy from the drive, and pulled me into a hug that felt like the first safe place in hours. We drove to his tiny studio apartment near the lake, where he made coffee and listened without judgment as I poured out the story. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply, and for the first time that night, the knot in my chest loosened. The next weeks blurred into survival. I crashed on his couch, took a job washing dishes at a diner downtown, and tried to ignore the constant voice in my head, whispering that I had ruined my family forever. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake listening to the city hum outside, wondering if my mother cried herself to sleep or if Dad had already erased my name from the family Bible. Alexander never pushed, but his quiet presence helped me breathe. He took me to a free youth center for LGBTQ kids one evening, where counselors talked about identity without shame. For the first time, I heard other guys my age share stories that mirrored mine, and something inside me shifted. The shame didn't vanish, but it stopped feeling like the only truth I owned. Alexander and I started talking more openly, sharing late-night stories about our first crushes and the fear of being found out. He had come out to his own parents at 17 and lost a few relatives, but they had eventually come around. "It takes time," he told me one rainy afternoon as we walked along the lakefront. "And sometimes it never comes. But you build your own family." Those words planted a seed. I enrolled in night classes at the community college, working double shifts to pay for books. The internal storm raged on, moments of doubt crashing against small victories like landing a better job at a bookstore. Every letter I wrote home went unanswered. My mother sent one short note after 3 months. "We love you, but we can't accept this lifestyle. Pray for strength." It broke me all over again, but Alexander held me through the tears, his hands steady on my back. Slowly, the boy who left Ohio began to disappear, replaced by someone learning to stand on his own. The city taught me resilience in ways the farm never could. I learned to navigate crowded trains, budget every dollar, And most importantly, look in the mirror without flinching at the word gay. Alexander became more than a friend during those early months. Our first kiss happened on a bench by the lake under a sky full of stars, tentative and full of the kind of hope I hadn't felt since childhood. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was simply right. That moment marked the beginning of something deeper, a partnership built on shared pain and quiet strength. By the end of the year, I had saved enough to rent a room in a shared apartment and started dreaming bigger than survival. The road ahead still felt uncertain, but with Alexander beside me, the weight of rejection no longer defined me entirely. I was starting to understand that my story was mine to write, even if the first chapter had been torn out by the people who were supposed to protect me. The winter of my second year in Chicago brought blizzards that matched the storm still brewing inside me. I had moved into a cramped walk-up with 2 other guys from the youth center, but the nights when loneliness hit hardest were the ones I spent at Alexander's place. We had grown closer, our friendship evolving into something tender and steady that neither of us had words for yet. He was working part-time at a law firm while finishing his degree, always making time to help me study for my own classes. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for," he would say, sliding a textbook across the kitchen table. His encouragement became my anchor as I balanced 2 jobs and night school, determined not to let the past drag me under. Memories of home surfaced at the worst times. I would catch a glimpse of a father and son at the grocery store and feel the old ache return. Dad's final words still rang in my ears during quiet moments, but Alexander had a way of pulling me back. One evening after a brutal shift at the bookstore, I broke down over burnt toast. What if they're right? What if I'm just confused? He set his coffee down and took my hands. "Jude, loving me doesn't make you wrong. It makes you human." That simple truth cracked open the wall I had built around my heart. We started dating officially after that, small steps like holding hands on the L train or sharing a single milkshake after class. The relationship wasn't without its own struggles. I carried guilt about dragging him into my mess, and he admitted his fear of losing me to the same prejudice that had cost him pieces of his own family. But we talked through every doubt, learning that real connection meant facing the hard parts together. The youth center became our second home. I volunteered there on weekends, listening to younger kids share their stories and realizing my pain could help someone else. One boy named Marcus reminded me so much of myself at 15 that I stayed late one night just to make sure he had a safe ride home. Alexander joined me, and together we became unofficial big brothers to a dozen teens navigating their own coming-out journeys. Those experiences shifted something fundamental in me. I stopped seeing my identity as a flaw and started viewing it as strength. Work opportunities began to open up. A regular customer at the bookstore, a manager at a small marketing firm, offered me an entry-level position after hearing about my classes. The pay was better, the hours more flexible, and suddenly I could afford actual groceries instead of ramen. Alexander celebrated by taking me to a quiet Italian place downtown, where we lingered over pasta and talked about the future. "I see you running your own company one day," he said, eyes bright with belief. I laughed it off, but the idea stuck. College classes intensified, and I chose business as my major, drawn to the idea of building something from nothing the way I was rebuilding myself. The coursework challenged me in ways farm chores never had, teaching me strategy, leadership, and the power of persistence. Late nights studying with Alexander became our ritual, papers spread across his tiny table, coffee refills keeping us going until dawn. During one particularly tough semester, I hit a wall of self-doubt after failing a midterm. "I don't belong here," I told him, voice thick. He pulled me close. "You belong anywhere you decide to stand." His words carried me through the retake and beyond. Family silence continued to sting. I sent birthday cards to Tommy and Mom, but only Tommy wrote back once, a short note saying Dad had forbidden contact. The rejection still hurt, but it no longer paralyzed me. Alexander's parents, who lived in Michigan, invited us for Thanksgiving that year. Their warm acceptance felt foreign but healing. Sitting around their table, I realized chosen family could fill the gaps left by blood. The holiday marked a turning point. I returned to Chicago with a clearer sense of purpose. By spring, I had interned at the marketing firm and landed a full-time role after graduation. The promotion came with a small raise and the chance to lead my first campaign. Alexander finished his degree and started at the law firm full-time, his steady presence the constant in my changing world. Our relationship deepened into something profound. We moved in together into a one-bedroom near Lincoln Park, painting the walls together on weekends and laughing over failed cooking attempts. The simple acts of domestic life healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Yet the internal journey continued. I attended support groups at the center, sharing my story publicly for the first time at an open mic night. The applause after I spoke about leaving Ohio felt like permission to keep growing. Alexander sat in the front row, pride shining in his eyes. That night we walked home under streetlights, hands linked, talking about dreams bigger than either of us had imagined alone. The city that once felt overwhelming now felt like possibility. I started saving aggressively, researching startup ideas in sustainable business. Alexander supported every late-night brainstorm, his legal mind helping me outline plans. The boy who had been thrown out was transforming into a man who refused to be defined by rejection. The road ahead still held uncertainty, but for the first time, I believed I could walk it on my own terms, with the man I loved beside me every step. 5 years slipped by in a rhythm of hard work and quiet victories that slowly reshaped my entire world. The marketing firm had promoted me twice, but I felt the pull toward something bigger. Alexander and I had moved into a modest apartment in Wicker Park, where evenings were filled with strategy sessions over Thai takeout. I pitched my first business idea to him one rainy Sunday, a consulting firm focused on helping small manufacturers adopt green practices. "It's risky," he said, but his smile told me he was in. We scraped together savings, took out a small loan, and registered GreenPath Solutions with the state. The early days were brutal. Cold calls, rejection emails, and nights where we ate cereal for dinner tested every ounce of resilience I had built. Alexander balanced his legal career with helping me file paperwork and draft contracts, his belief in us never wavering. "We're building something real," he reminded me during our lowest month when the bank account dipped dangerously low. Client wins started small but grew. A local brewery hired us to overhaul their supply chain, and word spread through Chicago's business community. I poured everything into presentations and research, staying up until 3 a.m. perfecting slides while Alexander rubbed my shoulders and brought coffee. The work felt meaningful, aligning with the values I had discovered in myself after leaving home. Our relationship matured through the pressure. We faced our first real argument when a big deadline kept me away for 2 straight weeks. "I miss you," he said quietly one night, and I realized success couldn't come at the cost of us. We made a pact to protect our time together, scheduling weekly dates even if it meant working later other nights. Those moments grounded me. Holding his hand across a candlelit table reminded me why I fought so hard. Family thoughts still surfaced, especially around holidays. I sent a Christmas card every year, but responses remained sparse. Tommy turned 18 and wrote a longer letter, admitting he had come out to Mom as bisexual and faced similar pushback. Knowing he carried some of the same pain both broke and strengthened me. I wired him money for college without telling Dad and encouraged him to call anytime. Alexander's family continued to welcome us, their acceptance a healing contrast that made the Ohio silence easier to bear. Business growth accelerated in year 4. We landed a contract with a national chain, and suddenly GreenPath had 5 employees and an office in a converted warehouse. I hired my first assistant, a sharp young woman named Lena who became like a sister. Alexander left the law firm to join me full-time as general counsel, his steady legal mind protecting everything we built. The company's mission expanded to include mentoring LGBTQ entrepreneurs, giving back to the community that had saved me. Traveling for client meetings took us to cities across the Midwest and eventually the coasts. In San Francisco, we walked the Castro district hand in hand, feeling the history of men who had paved the way for us. In New York, we attended a conference where I spoke on a panel about sustainable business and identity. The applause and follow-up questions validated years of doubt. Through it all, Alexander remained my rock. One evening in a hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, he proposed with a simple silver band. "Marry me, Jude. Let's keep building this life together." Tears blurred my vision as I said yes. Our wedding was small and perfect, held at a lakeside venue with close friends from the youth center and Alexander's family. No one from Ohio came, but the absence no longer defined the day. We danced under string lights, promising forever in front of people who truly saw us. Married life brought new layers of joy and responsibility. We bought a small house in the suburbs, planted a garden, and talked about fostering kids one day. The business hit 7 figures in revenue, allowing us to hire more staff and expand services nationwide. I started giving talks at universities about overcoming rejection and building authentic lives. Each speech healed another piece of the boy who had stood on that porch years ago. Yet the past lingered in quiet moments. I still dreamed of Dad's angry face and woke up reaching for Alexander's hand. He understood without words, pulling me close until the nightmare faded. The company's growth opened doors I never imagined. When a major agricultural conglomerate in Ohio faced environmental lawsuits, they approached GreenPath for consultation. The irony hit hard. My home state, the place that had rejected me, now needed the expertise I had fought to gain. Alexander and I discussed the opportunity late into the night. "This could be closure," he said. I wasn't sure I was ready, but the businessman in me saw the potential. We flew to Columbus for the initial meeting, and the familiar Midwest landscape stirred emotions I thought I had buried. Returning to Ohio felt like stepping into a time capsule. The meeting went well, but I kept my personal connection private. Back in Chicago, we signed the contract that would change everything. Little did I know it would lead me straight back to the farmhouse porch where my story began. The years of growth had prepared me for whatever came next, but nothing could have readied me for the confrontation that waited when I finally decided to reveal who I had become. The contract with the Ohio agricultural giant consumed our lives for months, but it also forced me to confront the geography of my past in ways I hadn't anticipated. GreenPath's team flew back and forth, and each trip brought me closer to the town I had fled. Alexander sensed my tension and suggested we drive past the old farmhouse one afternoon after a meeting in Columbus. "Only if you want to," he said gently. I shook my head. "Not yet." Instead, we focused on the work. Our firm's recommendations saved the company millions and earned us national recognition. Industry magazines featured our story, though they never mentioned my personal connection. Success felt bittersweet. I had built something meaningful, yet the people who should have celebrated it most remained silent. Tommy kept in touch secretly, sharing updates about Mom's declining health and Dad's stubborn refusal to modernize the family feed mill. The mill had been in our family for generations, but poor management and changing regulations threatened to close it forever. When the conglomerate's parent company decided to divest non-core assets, the mill came up for sale. Alexander and I reviewed the numbers late one night in our Chicago kitchen. "We could buy it," I said quietly. The idea had been forming for weeks. Owning the place that symbolized everything my father valued felt like poetic justice, but more than that, it offered a chance to prove something to myself. Alexander studied my face. "Are you ready for what that means?" I wasn't sure, but the decision felt inevitable. We structured the deal through a holding company to keep my name out of initial paperwork. GreenPath acquired the mill for a fair price, and I became the silent majority owner. The announcement was scheduled for the following month at the mill's annual meeting. I requested that the current management stay on until the transition. In the meantime, life in Chicago continued. We celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary with a trip to the Grand Canyon, standing on the rim at sunrise and talking about how far we had come. Alexander's arm around my shoulders reminded me that home was wherever we were together. Back home, we hosted a small dinner party for our expanded team, toasting to the future. Lena pulled me aside afterward. "You're different since that Ohio deal," Lighter somehow. She was right. The act of reclaiming my past on my own terms was healing old wounds. The day of the announcement arrived faster than I expected. Alexander and I flew to Ohio together, checking into a hotel in the next town over. I wore the same tailored suit I had bought for our wedding, but this time it felt like armor. The mill parking lot was full when we pulled in. Workers milled around, whispering about the new owners. I waited until the meeting began before stepping onto the stage with Alexander at my side. The room fell silent as I took the microphone. Good morning. My name is Jude Harlan, and I am the new CEO of Harlan Feed and Grain. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Former neighbors, old high school classmates, and longtime employees stared in disbelief. I kept my voice steady, outlining our vision for modernization and sustainability while honoring the mill's legacy. Alexander stood beside me, his presence a quiet statement of partnership. When I finished, the applause was tentative at first, then genuine. But the real shock came later when I drove to the farmhouse. The sun was setting as we pulled into the familiar driveway. My mother was watering flowers on the porch. She dropped the hose when she recognized me. Dad stepped out, older and grayer, his face hardening into the same mask I remembered from that terrible night. Tommy appeared behind them, a young man now, grinning despite the tension. Jude, Mom whispered. I stepped forward with Alexander's hand in mine. I'm home, and I own the mill now. The words hung in the evening air, changing everything in an instant. Dad's face went pale. The man who had thrown me out stood speechless before the son who had returned not broken, but powerful. The confrontation had only just begun, but I was no longer the boy they had discarded. I was a man who had built his own legacy, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The silence on the porch stretched until it felt like the air itself might snap. Dad's hands clenched at his sides, knuckles white against the faded flannel he still wore after all these years. You, he finally managed, voice rough with disbelief and something darker. Mom covered her mouth, tears already spilling. Tommy broke the tension by bounding down the steps to pull me into a hug. I knew you'd come back big, he whispered. Alexander stayed close, his calm presence steadying me as I introduced him properly. This is my husband, Alexander. The word husband landed like a second blow. Dad turned away, shoulders rigid, while Mom hesitated before offering a shaky handshake. Inside the house, the familiar smell of lemon polish and old wood nearly undid me. We sat around the kitchen table where the original fight had erupted. I laid out the facts without anger. How I had left with nothing, built a company from scratch, and acquired the mill through legitimate business channels. I didn't come to gloat, I said. I came because the mill matters, and so does this family, even after everything. Dad's response was immediate and cutting. You think money fixes what you are? The old wound reopened, but I had spent years learning to stand in my truth. Alexander squeezed my knee under the table, a silent reminder of the life we had created beyond this room. I met Dad's eyes. No, Dad. Love and hard work fixed me. The money just proves I didn't need your approval to succeed. The conversation fractured into accusations and defenses. Mom cried quietly, torn between the son she had lost and the one who had returned. Tommy defended me fiercely, revealing his own struggles and how my absence had forced him to question everything. Old hurts surfaced. The letters I sent that were returned unopened, the holidays spent alone while they pretended I didn't exist. Alexander listened more than he spoke, but when Dad turned on him with a biting remark about influencing me, Alexander responded with quiet dignity. I didn't make Jude gay, sir. I just loved him when you wouldn't. The room fell quiet again. For the first time, I saw cracks in Dad's armor. He left the table without another word, retreating to the barn like he always did when emotions ran high. Mom stayed, asking hesitant questions about our life in Chicago, our wedding, the work we did. Her curiosity felt like the first bridge. Tommy and I walked the property later, catching up on lost years. He admitted the family had struggled financially for a long time, and my purchase of the mill had actually saved jobs. They wouldn't admit it, but you're the reason the mill stays open, he said. The realization brought complicated relief. That night at the hotel, Alexander and I talked for hours. The confrontation had stirred every insecurity I thought I had conquered. Did I do the right thing coming back? I asked. He kissed my forehead. You came back as yourself. That's always right. The following days brought more difficult conversations. Dad avoided me at first, but the mill's transition meetings forced proximity. I watched him listen during presentations about new equipment and fair wages, his stubborn pride slowly giving way to reluctant respect. One afternoon in the feed storage barn, he finally spoke without anger. I didn't know how to be a father to someone like you. The admission wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Misunderstandings still arose. An old employee spread rumors about favoritism, and a heated argument with Tommy about past secrecy nearly derailed progress. Alexander mediated with the same patience that had carried us through our own early struggles. He reminded us all that healing wasn't linear. Mom began inviting us for Sunday dinners, small steps toward normalcy that felt monumental. She even asked Alexander about his favorite recipes, a quiet acknowledgement of our marriage. The internal growth I experienced during those weeks was profound. I forgave pieces of the past without erasing them, understanding that my father's prejudice came from fear, not hatred. Alexander's support allowed me to show up fully, modeling the kind of love I had always wanted from my family. The mill's transformation became a metaphor for our family's slow change. New systems improved efficiency, jobs were secured, and the town began to notice. Local papers ran stories about the prodigal son returning, though I declined most interviews. The pressure tested every relationship, but each challenge reinforced the man I had become. By the end of the month, Dad shook my hand at the mill's reopening ceremony. It wasn't perfect, and the road to full acceptance still stretched ahead, but the foundation had been laid. Alexander and I drove away from Ohio that evening with a new understanding. We had returned not to reclaim the past, but to build a future where love didn't require permission. The drive back to Chicago felt different this time, lighter somehow, as if the weight I had carried for over a decade had finally shifted. Alexander and I stopped at a roadside diner halfway home, the same kind of place where I had once washed dishes just to survive. Over coffee and pie, we reflected on the whirlwind month. You faced them as you are, he said, pride evident in his voice. I reached across the table for his hand. We faced them together. Back in our suburban house, life resumed with a new rhythm. Greenpath continued to thrive, and the Ohio Mill became a flagship example of our sustainable model. Tommy visited us that summer, bringing stories of Dad asking tentative questions about the business and even mentioning my name without the old bitterness. Mom called once a month now, awkward conversations that gradually grew warmer. She sent photos of the garden and asked about our plans for the holidays. We invited the whole family to Chicago for Thanksgiving, and to our surprise, they accepted. The dinner was far from perfect. Dad remained quiet at first, but when he tasted Alexander's stuffing and offered a gruff compliment, the ice began to thaw. Tommy and I stayed up late talking about the future, and Mom hugged me tightly before they left. I'm proud of the man you've become, she whispered. Not everyone changed overnight. Dad still struggled with public displays of affection between Alexander and me, but he no longer walked away. Small victories accumulated. He asked for advice on mill operations, and once, he even referred to Alexander as my son-in-law in a conversation with a neighbor. The internal transformation in me was the deepest change. I no longer carried the fear that my identity made me unworthy. Therapy sessions I had started years earlier helped me process the remaining pain, turning old scars into sources of strength. Alexander and I discussed starting a family, perhaps through adoption, and the idea felt like the natural next chapter in our shared journey. The company expanded further, opening offices in 3 new states and launching a scholarship program for LGBTQ youth, pursuing business degrees. I spoke at the youth center where Alexander and I had first connected as volunteers, sharing the full circle of my story without bitterness. The standing ovation reminded me how far one rejected boy could travel. Seasons passed, and with them came deeper acceptance. We spent a Christmas at the farmhouse, decorating the tree together as a family. Dad even joined the carol singing, his voice rusty but present. The moment wasn't cinematic or complete, but it was real. I had returned with a status that stunned them, yet the true power lay in the relationships we rebuilt through patience and honesty. Looking back across the years, the boy thrown out into the night had become a man who chose love over resentment every single day. Alexander remained my constant, our bond stronger for every trial we had faced. Together we had proven that identity wasn't a flaw to hide but a foundation to build upon. The family I was born into had grown alongside the family I chose, and in that balance I finally found peace. As we stood on our porch one crisp fall evening watching the sunset paint the sky, Alexander slipped his arm around my waist. "We did it," he said softly. I smiled, knowing the journey wasn't over, but the path ahead was ours to shape. True or false, blood ties can overcome deep-seated prejudice against gay love.